Tonight's tale is one of love, betrayal, and a mystery that still haunts the Emerald Hills of Ireland. Whenever her name is mentioned, it is in a hush of reverence. Colleen Bawn, the fair maiden of County Limerick, whose beauty was outshone only by the tragedy that claimed her. Was it fate that led her to the river's edge that beautiful morning? Or something far darker hidden away in a sinister web of lust, forbidden love, deception, and greed? Some say her ghost still wanders along the shores of the Shannon, her voice carried on the wind and the screech of the shorebirds, begging for justice, or perhaps revenge. Gather near and heed this warning, for not all fairy tale marriages have happy endings. Some are written in blood. This is the story of Colleen Bawn. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel, as it really helps us bring you more fireside tales like this. In 1819, Ireland was a land of stark divides between rich and poor and Protestant and Catholic. It was here, in the soft, verdant landscape of Kildemo, 8 miles from Limerick City and not far from the tidal flats of the Shannon River estuary, a tragedy unfolded, one so shocking it would become legend: the murder of Colleen Bawn. Ellen Hanley, an orphaned 15-year-old Catholic peasant girl brought up in a 2-roomed thatched cottage by her labourer uncle Connor Hanley, was so strikingly beautiful she caught the eye of every young man for miles around and beyond. Contemporaries, who described her as having pale skin, long, lustrous hair and a delicate frame, nicknamed her Colleen Bawn, which in Irish literally means white girl, a nickname commonly used for a fair-haired, fair-skinned or exceedingly beautiful girl. Bawn is linguistically associated with the Breton name Gwen, where the Irish B became GW in Welsh and Breton, but is supposedly unrelated to the Scottish word bonny. Later, when her heartbreaking story became a symbol for the Irish pathos, it inspired numerous works of fiction, highlighting the divides in Irish society. As her story merged into legend, she became known as the fair-haired girl of Kildemo. Incidentally, when the writer grew up in Limerick, we called newborn piglets Bawns after their light colour. John Scanlon was the spoiled, reckless heir to a relatively rich, social-climbing Protestant landowning family who lived with his parents in their large house on the grounds of the ruined Ballycahane Castle. Being a member of a minor Irish gentry family, John would probably have been homeschooled and is believed to have attended Trinity University in Dublin, although no records confirm this. While there is no evidence he ever served in the military, he may have joined a local yeomanry, a Protestant militia used for suppressing local uprisings, and sometimes to assist the baronial police, known as the Old Barneys, that dealt with minor crimes and offences. In both the court records of 1820 and contemporary accounts in the Limerick Evening Post, he was described as a landowner's son, without mention of any rank, which they almost certainly would have had he served. The family appears to have owned over 1,100 acres in their Ballycahane estate, as well as numerous other holdings. Local folklorists describe John as a wastrel who squandered his family resources and followed ruinous pursuits. The Limerick Evening Post in 1820 alluded to his family's frustration with his wasteful habits and mismanagement of their estate funds. He certainly appears to have been an undisciplined gambler that frequently accumulated unpaid gambling debts. Contemporary accounts described him as dissipated, reckless, and fond of low company. It is likely Scanlon frequented one of the notorious gentlemen's pubs in the Limerick area, where men like Scanlon could socialise, gamble, or conduct business without scrutiny. Local folklore has Scanlon first laying eyes on Ellen at a local fair or market, and his immediately becoming obsessed with her beauty. It is believed he pursued Ellen aggressively, visiting her uncle's humble cottage on several occasions, offering small gifts or money to gain favour. Eventually, John proposed a secret marriage. For Ellen, this would have been a dream come true of elevating her status to mistress of the big house. Yet, this dream came with enormous risk. To the Scanlons, a secret marriage would have been a huge embarrassment. Not only was she a Catholic, but she also possessed no pedigree. She'd not been brought up learning the secret codes of British Regency etiquette that were passed on only to those they deemed worthy. In landed gentry circles, having impeccable manners was essential to be accepted, and these codes of conduct were used to judge a person's worth. Knowing them was often held in higher esteem than the quality of one's character. The uninitiated were betrayed as people not in the know by their choice of words, the way they ate, sat, and walked, nuances in fashion, conversational skills, and knowledge of the classics. For a lady, chastity was paramount, and even a hint of a scandal, such as elopement, would destroy her. Some accounts suggest that after their secret wedding in April 1819, possibly at a church in Abbeyfield, John Scanlon briefly moved Ellen to Glan House, a property owned by the Scanlon family near Labashida in County Clare, on the opposite shore of the Shannon estuary. This would have been a secluded spot, hidden from society's prying eyes. The Scanlon family kept the marriage secret. To them, Ellen was a problem to be hidden away. Within weeks of his secret marriage, John again found himself in financial distress. Someone in the family, possibly his father, Robert, suggested John could pay his debts if he were to forget about Ellen and marry the daughter of a studard, a rich family that owned several estates and were related to some of the top families in the area. Incidentally, one of their estates appears to have been within 2 or 3 miles of Glan House, and may have been the place where John and the studard girl got to know each other. In any event, John decided he would be better off married to this girl, who came with a large dowry. July 14th, 1819, was a beautiful day, and Scanlon thought the weather ideal to go sailing on the Shannon, and so invited Ellen to come along. Having been cooped up and hidden away in her house for so long, Ellen eagerly agreed to accompany her husband and his servant, Stephen Sullivan, for a relaxing day on the river. For 6 weeks, the river kept its gruesome secret, until one day, near Money Point, the waves washed up a badly decomposed corpse on the shore, where it was discovered by a boatman named Patrick MacDonnell. The body of a young adult female was bound by rope and weighted down with rocks and a broken fragment of a grindstone. The unknown woman had been tightly bound by her stays and shot in her head. Ellen's body was soon identified by her uncle, Connor Hanley, when he recognised her clothing, hair, blue ribbon, and a birthmark. Suspicion quickly fell upon Scanlon when the rope's weave was recognised by locals as the type made on the Scanlon estate. When shown the knots used to secure the weights, estate employees easily identified them as being consistent with those they often used. This evidence tied someone from the Scanlon estate to the victim. The rope, with its unusual knots, gave investigators reasonable grounds to search the Scanlon property. Since the shore of that stretch of the Shannon is tidal mud flats and is devoid of suitable rocks, the murderer would have needed to bring his own weights to load down the body. When the Scanlon property was searched, they found the grindstone piece used to sink Ellen's body perfectly matched a broken grinding wheel located on Scanlon's property. John Scanlon was arrested for the murder of his wife. Although highly suspicious of Sullivan, the prosecutors felt at that time they didn't have sufficient proof of his involvement and let him go. The trial for the murder of Colleen Bawn took place in the Old County Limerick Courthouse near Nicholas Street on April 17, 1820. While Ellen's body had been found in County Clare, because of the enormous interest in the affair, it had been decided to move the trial to the larger county courthouse in Limerick City. In the end, the jury believed the evidence against Scanlon was too circumstantial and was insufficient for a conviction, and therefore acquitted him. The public became enraged. Skeptics at the time believed it was impossible to conduct a fair trial in Limerick, since numerous people in the area either worked for the Scanlon family or were their tenants. Further, since John's father, Robert Scanlon, was a land agent for some of the leading landowners in County Limerick and could easily affect the livelihood of their tenants, it might be unwise to aggravate him. It was also thought very likely some members of the jury were friends with both John and Robert. After Scanlon's acquittal, authorities took a closer interest in Stephen Sullivan, Scanlon's servant, and arrested him in May of that year. At this point, public fury was demanding justice, whilst new witnesses came forward, placing all three on the river that night. Although the rope and grindstone were mere mundane items ubiquitous throughout rural Ireland, surprisingly, they became critical for tying the perpetrator to the Scanlon estate, and showed both means and opportunity. The evidence seemed damning, and Sullivan, fearing he was facing the noose by himself, turned on his master. Under interrogation, Sullivan confessed on the promises of being able to avoid execution by having his sentence commuted to being transported to an Australian penal colony for life. Since, at the time, the modern legal concept of double jeopardy did not exist in Ireland, two new separate trials were ordered to take place in June 1820 in the city of Tralee, well away from the distractions of Limerick. Because he had already been acquitted by a lawful court for the exact same crime, Scanlon must have pleaded autrefois acquis, because the prosecutors argued both the facts and evidence from Sullivan's confession were new, and therefore negated autrefois acquis. They also maintained by holding the retrial in a different venue with a different judge in Tralee, they circumvented autrefois acquis. Stephen Sullivan agreed to turn King's evidence and testified Scanlon had ordered him to kill Ellen with the promise of money and other favours. He said they had lured Ellen onto the boat under the false pretences of a pleasure trip, and insisted Scanlon had been present the entire time of the murder, contradicting Scanlon's claims he had been uninvolved. New witnesses came forward. Local boatmen testified they had seen Scanlon, Sullivan and Ellen together on the River Shannon near Glynn on the alleged night of the murder, and Scanlon appeared to them to be acting nervously. A local woman named Bridget O'Donnell testified to seeing Ellen, Scanlon and Sullivan together as they approached the Shannon estuary shortly before Ellen's disappearance, and described her as looking somewhat distressed. All three were subsequently seen embarking their sailboat by some men on the shore. Several fishermen testified to seeing Scanlon and Sullivan later in the day in a boat off the Gaelic-speaking communities of Carrigaholt and Kilrush, where the river merged into the Atlantic Ocean, one claiming to have seen two men matching Scanlon's and Sullivan's description struggling with a young woman. Sullivan confessed to shooting Ellen using John Scanlon's pistol, which was consistent with the wounds on Ellen's skull. Since Scanlon's family owned several firearms, it seemed plausible to the jury he supplied the weapon. The court heard how Scanlon had behaved suspiciously after Ellen's disappearance. Witnesses claimed he had left the area for a while and was described as agitated upon his return. Sullivan's account matched all the physical evidence from the grindstone, rope, gunshot wounds, and was consistent with the new witness statements. The jury took just 15 minutes to convict John for the murder of Colleen Bawn and was sentenced to death. Scanlon was hanged at Gallows Green in Limerick on August 16, 1820. His body was then dissected supposedly for anatomical study, which was a common practice at the time for executed criminals. The Limerick Chronicle newspaper, August 19, 1820 edition, reported, Scanlon suffered execution on Wednesday last, and was publicly dissected in front of medical students and members of the public. His remains were then likely buried in an unmarked grave at Ballysimon Cemetery, a common burial site for executed criminals near Limerick. Although it was typical at the time for rich families to claim the body of a family member before dissection to avoid further public shame, the Scanlons did not, and the spectacle drew an unusually large crowd of curious onlookers. As someone once put it, Scanlon wasn't just convicted by the evidence, he was convicted by his own arrogance. He never imagined a broken stone and a length of rope would hang him. Stephen Sullivan was subsequently convicted in a separate trial in Tralee, and despite his apparent expectation of commutation, was hanged at Gallows Green over a month later on October 7, 1820. The Freeman's Journal of October 10, 1820, stated, Sullivan was executed on Saturday. He too was publicly dissected in compliance with the Murder Act of 1752. The story of the Colleen Bawn quickly became folklore, a warning about greed, arrogance, and the divides that shaped 19th century Ireland. But behind all the ballads, horror stories, romance novels, and plays Colleen Bawn's story inspired lay a real girl, a real crime, and two men who learned too late that some stones, once thrown, will always sink you. As one historian put it, in these later novels, she became whomever the teller needed her to be, a peasant girl, a seduced maiden, or a ghost demanding justice. And so, as the memory of Colleen Bawn slowly fades into the gentle mists of time, her story remains as a haunting reminder that love and betrayal sometimes walk hand in hand, and some ghosts may never truly rest. Was it a selfish man's reckless lust for a woman too beautiful, the desperation of a wayward man addicted to gambling, or sheer evil that sealed her story? Perhaps the truth still lies, hidden somewhere in the mythical waters of the Shannon River. But before you go, if this tale sent a shiver down your spine or stirred your imagination, do us a kindness and leave us a like, and subscribe to Storyteller's Hearth Fireside Tales. For as long as our fire burns, we'll keep weaving legends, unearthing mysteries, and spinning yarns that will linger in your mind long after the embers fade.